all. So Helminths is a general term applied to all worms, and these worms in general are of three kinds. We have nematodes or nematodes, depending on how you would like to pronounce that, which are non-segmented roundworms. Now we can all think of a segmented roundworm, right? The annelids, the worms that are found in the ground, earthworms. These are different, but some of these also live in the ground. We'll see about that in a minute. Then there are the cestodes. Cestodes are segmented and they're flat. We commonly call these tapeworms. And finally, we have the trematodes. The trematodes are sort of a mix between non-segmented and flat. So trematodes are non-segmented and they're flat and they're very complicated in their lifestyles, as we will see as we get to them. But the first group we're going to discuss are the nematodes. Now, they're all eukaryotes, of course, and the best example I can tell you about is Caenorhabditis elegans, and it's the one which is now the genetic model for that stage of life in the environment. So Caenorhabditis elegans is a nematode that was isolated from soil and then colonized and then cloned and then studied ad nauseum. We now know everything about this worm that we can possibly know. We know how many genes it has. We know what the genes do. We know which every cell in this organism does. And we've discovered much about biology in general by simply looking at an organism that not only has a gut tract and muscular system and an excretory system, but it also has a brain. This is the first group of organisms that we'll be discussing that has a brain. It's a very simple brain, but it controls a lot of what this worm can do. And if you can imagine what a Caenorhabditis would be like as a parasite, then that gives you some clue as to where we're heading in terms of our discussion of nematodes in general. Now, for the most part, nematodes are not parasitic. In fact, the great majority are not. And most of them live in soil, but they live in some other weird places as well. They can live in ice. They can live at the bottom of the ocean. They can live at the top of Mount Everest. They can live virtually wherever there's land or some substrate to take advantage of. Even though their metabolism might be rather slow in some of these instances, we can still find them there. So nematodes are opportunistic in terms of the environment. And that includes us because we're part of the environment. Now, when we discuss parasitic nematodes, we're discussing some 4 billion people throughout the world harboring some form of nematode parasite. And in fact, as we'll see, our first example, pinworm infection, probably infects virtually every human being on this planet. There are a group of helminths. In this case, they're called geohelminths. They all happen to be nematodes, that they're transmitted in a really simple way. The parasite sheds a stage, which then is deposited in the feces. The feces then disintegrates as nature takes over and recycles all those goodies in our excrement, because to the rest of life forms on Earth, that represents fertilizer, by the way, and a nutrient opportunity. The eggs of those parasites, eggs, notice I'm saying eggs now, can then be ingested by things like earthworms. And the earthworm travels throughout the soil and redeposits those eggs in other places other than where they were originally deposited. And then we can encounter them in our food and our water, and they infect some 4 billion people collectively. And we're going to discuss their biologies as we get to them. So helminths, now we're back to all of them. This includes nematodes, cestodes, and trematodes. They occupy a variety of places in our body, primarily the alimentary tract. The small and large intestine are favorite sites for a lot of these because that's the first place that they encounter after we ingest them. Very few can actually penetrate the unbroken skin and gain entrance that way, but we'll see there are some that can do that as well. They can occupy the cavities in the body, like the cavities of the stomach. They can occupy the cerebrospinal fluid. They can go into various organs and tissues. They can become involved in the circulatory system. The filarial parasites certainly are in that category. They can also infect the lymphatics as well. And then finally, we have a lot of helminths that stay within the skin or in the subcutaneous tissues. But notice that's not such a small number. 56 different species of helminths have been known to do that in humans. When we look all together at the various categories of helminths and then break them out in terms of nematodes and cestodes and flatworms, or the flukes, the trematodes, we can now see that they don't all infect at the same numbers. The number of species, for instance, for platyhelminthes, and that includes both the flukes and the tapeworms. Collectively, there are more species that infect humans than just the nematodes. But this is basically what the human condition encounters throughout the world every single day. But we have answers for these infections as well. It's not all one-sided, and not all these nematodes and cestodes and trematodes succeed when they infect the human host. And just to give you an overview of the way the immune system breaks apart in terms of handling protozoan infections, which we've already discussed, and these newer entities, which we will be discussing, they seem to vary quite a bit in terms of the branches of the immune system that can interact to prevent them from succeeding. It's mostly a Th1-based immunity for the protozoans, and mostly, notice I'm saying there might be exceptions here, but mostly it's a Th2 immune system, which interferes with the biology of the helminths. A lot of cytokines are elicited also during these infections, and some of them have something to do with protection, and others actually have something to do with innocent bystander effects, which actually creates more morbidity and sometimes mortality in the infected individual.
Hello again. Now you're going to be getting from me the perspectives of a clinician. I'll be giving again a clinical vignette, discussing a little bit about clinical disease, diagnosis, and treatment. And as we go through, all that you've learned from the introduction, the life cycle, the cellular and molecular pathogenesis should inform you, should give you a chance to think about, why are we seeing this particular clinical disease? Why are we seeing this manifestation? And then thinking about that, help you with how are we going to approach diagnosis? And then treatment will be capping off. What do we do once we have seen the disease, made the diagnosis? How do we actually make our patients better?
I glossed over that very rapidly because we'll be returning to those subjects as individual parasites become discussed throughout this exciting new section on helminths. If you want to see something about how geohelminths in general affect public health, here's a nice review article for you. So the next time we're going to delve.
All right. So there we go. All right. So I thought that was a great sort of overview, if you will, of the three classes of helminths that we'll go into some detail about in this unit. Let me. Oops. All right, so let's get down to a few details here. All right, so we're talking about our helminths, our introduction to helminths. All right, so the word helminth literally translates to the word worm, right? Some basic characteristics that you should be familiar with is that these are multicellular organisms, right? These are eukaryotic organisms, and they're going to be our invertebrates, right? They typically have a tube-like or flattened bodies. They do exhibit bilateral symmetry. Does anyone know what this bilateral symmetry refers to? What does this feature look like in an organism or refer to? What is bilateral symmetry?
Right. Yes, two segments.
Well, not just two segments, but it's something special about the two segments. All right. So bilateral symmetry refers to basically if you cut this organism in half, both pieces are going to be mirror images of each other. That's what bilateral symmetry refers to. Go ahead and jot that down and read up on it a little bit more if you need to. So these organisms are quite sophisticated in that they do have a digestive and reproductive tract. A lot of them are free living. You can find them in aquatic or terrestrial environments in soil, water, and so forth. But then obviously we have those that are parasitic, which are the ones that we care about because again, they do cause problems for humans. They are human pathogens. They are also pathogens of plants and animals, which becomes of concern for us because plants and animals are a source of food for us, right? So these are some very basic identifying characteristics of helminths that I would expect you to be familiar with. All right. So the different classes of helminths based on their body type, we have the helminths. These are our roundworms, sometimes referred to as nematodes or nematodes. We have flaky helminths, which are our flatworms. All right, flatworms can either be our cestones that are kind of tapeworms, and I'm sure you've at least heard about tapeworms before, even if you don't know anyone who's ever been infected by a tapeworm. But then we have trematodes, which are our fluke-like organisms, right? So I would like for you to be able to distinguish between these classifications in terms of morphology. So we have our roundworms, which are nematodes, and then we have flatworms, which are going to contain our cestodes and trematodes. All right. And so these worms are all, again, potentially parasitic in nature. They cause various diseases, various manifestations. It's typically going to be some type of a digestive malfunction, intestinal discomfort, diarrhea, things of that nature, because they will tend to parasitize our stomach area, okay, and intestinal tracts. All right, so we got roundworms, flatworms, which are our cestodes, and trematodes. All right, so let's see. We can also, one point of distinction is that we can categorize these worms based on their body cavities. Okay, some of these organisms have a true body cavity. Some of them have sort of these makeshift body cavities. So we have acollomates, pseudocollomates, and colmates that have a true epithelial lining or cavity opening in their bodies. All right, so there's 3 different body types depending on the makeup of that cavity. All right, so acollomates, pseudocollomates, and colmates. So jot those down for a point of reference. All right. Again, some other classifying points of classification for helminths. We have our nematodes, cestodes, and trematodes. Nematodes are our roundworms, cestodes are our tapeworms, and trematodes are our flukes. Okay, in terms of their body makeup, right? These nematodes or roundworms are going to kind of have that cylindrical morphology, right? Cestodes, these tapeworms are going to be segmented. All right, you've seen segmented worms before. And then we have our flukes that kind of have a more flat-like structure, and they are typically unsegmented. Okay, so we have a continuous flat or arrangement. Nematodes have a true body cavity, so the collomates, cestodes, and trematodes don't have that true distinct body cavity, so they're going to fall in line with the acollomates, so the pseudocollomates, where there's kind of a makeshift body cavity in our pseudocollomates. The digestive tracts in nematodes are complete. They're quite sophisticated. Tapeworms or our cestodes don't have a true sophisticated digestive tract. Sorry about that. And then our trematodes have an incomplete digestive tract. When it comes to the sex designation for the nematodes, they're going to have complete separate sexes. So you have either your male or your female worm. The cestodes are going to have hermaphroditic characteristics, basically where they manifest both reproductive organs for the male and the female. And our flukes are also going to be hermaphroditic. All right. So we have here just some illustrations or pictures of our flukes and our cestodes here. Our nematodes are our roundworms, which are going to be distinct morphologically based on the reproductive tract being present, a complete digestive tract. They have a complete body cavity. So these nematodes are quite interesting, and they certainly are parasitic to humans. All right. This is a picture of a tapeworm here. All right. And these are our flukes. We'll come back to those. All right. So let's talk a little bit about these nematodes. Nematodes are the roundworms. So if you go outside and dig in the soil, it's very possible that you can find a type of roundworm outside, right? So let's look at the roundworms. All right, these nematodes comprise the group of organisms containing the largest number of helminths that are parasitic to humans. All right, so they are of the most concern for us. They are in great abundance, great abundance. Characteristically, again, they are unsegmented. So we're going to have this continuous roundworm body. All right. They are going to exhibit bilateral symmetry. All right. There's going to be a lot of variation in their life cycle. Okay. Generally, they live very long time, like anywhere from 1 to 30 years, depending on the host for which they have parasitized. They can be found free living or parasitic. Some can have both a free living or parasitic stage in their life cycle, so that's quite unique. Again, these free living parasites can be found anywhere out in terrestrial or various environments. All right. These can vary in size from a few millimeters long to over a meter long. So that's a wide range of physical size, if you will. All right. So these nematodes are going to be, again, the most abundant in terms of the helminths that are human parasites. All right. So they're outnumbering other helminths. They can inhabit various environments, as I mentioned before, soils, fresh water. All right. They are parasitic in a number of different hosts. I don't think there's any one host that is exempt to a helminth infection with, like, for example, with the nematodes. So they can infect plants, animals, insects, and obviously humans. And this is why they are of concern for us, especially from a public health standpoint. All right. So we cannot underscore the importance of helminth infections in parasitology. Okay. Some other features is that the adult anterior body cavity, basically they have these hooks and teeth that are basically going to aid in their attachment to the host that they're trying to parasitize. All right, these teeth are also used for cutting. All right, so we have these teeth and hook-like structures that are aiding in attachment. All right. The body is quite complex, again, for the nematode. All right, the outer body is covered in sort of this cuticle. All right, but there's also these muscle layers underneath, and we talked about the fact that these nematodes are colomates. They do have that true body cavity. All right, the body makeup, again, it's quite sophisticated, and it does have some very important internal organs, including nerves, a well-developed digestive system, a complete reproductive system. Okay, so we've got complete reproductive organs in both the male and female. So we're talking the testes, the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles, ejaculatory ducts, all of these reproductive organs that we find in a true human. We can find these as well in our male helminths. Females are also going to have a complete reproductive tract, including our ovaries, ovary duct, uterus, vagina, all of these that are necessary for sexual reproduction for these organisms. Okay, so their reproductive capacity is that of sexual reproduction. All right, because they are two distinct organisms. Okay, they do not exhibit hermaphroditic characteristics. All right. So these nematodes are quite complex. What questions do we have so far? Great. So here we can see sort of an illustration of the body makeup of a nematode. We've got this mouth region where we'll definitely be able to find some of those hooks or teeth that are going to aid in attachment. We've got these nerve rings, we've got the pharynx, we've got the intestine here, we've got this pseudocolon. This is a female because we've got ovaries present, we've got this reproductive pore here that's going to aid in sexual reproduction. We've got the anus for the release of waste products. All right, we've got this cuticle covering over the body of this nematode. All right, so structurally, this is a very simple schematic of what this roundworm looks like. All right, and this is a female. Okay. Here we have a male and female sort of side by side where we've got that pharynx, we've got nerves, we've got the excretory system, we've got the intestines. Over here in the male, we can see the testes, we can see the sperm duct. All of these are a part of the male reproductive system. Okay. In the female over here, we've got ovaries, we've got a uterus, we've got a vulva, we've got an anus, we've got a complete intestine over here in our female. All right. So you should be able to identify, at least from a basic standpoint, if I showed you various pictures or images, you should be able to identify the difference between these different classes of worms in terms of a roundworm versus a cestode or a fluke, okay, based on their body makeup. Okay. In terms of the host, as I said before, I don't think there's any one organism that cannot be colonized by these worms, right? Humans are for sure a definitive host for nematodes, right? They can also infect animals, plants, insects, okay? Arthropods may serve as an intermediate host or as a vector, right? We've talked about the role of arthropods in parasitic infections, but many nematodes do not require an intermediate host, right, to complete their life cycle. But humans are a definitive host. Do jot that down, okay? So again, we have here a situation where these helminths, these nematodes, are able to cause a parasitic infection in humans. We can extract or isolate the eggs or larvae of these nematodes from the human, all right? So there are 3 stages that I want you to be generally familiar with in terms of the life cycle. There's an egg stage, which is going to be protected by the hard outer shell, right? Then there's the larval stage that once it's hatched, these larvae are going to continue to grow, right? And then there's this process known as molting that takes place during this larval stage, all right? Molting is a 2-step process, basically where they're going to shed that outer cuticle, right? And for a more flexible cuticle to grow, to form, so that's going to allow for continued growth and reproduction, right? So there's the 2 steps that you see with molting. I want you to jot this down and definitely go and read about this process a little bit more. But basically, there's a synthesis phase, and then there's an exsheathment phase where we're losing that outer hard old cuticle and replacing it with a new one, all right? And then so we've got the egg phase, we've got the larval phase, and then we've got the fully developed adult phases of the nematode, all right? The adult form is the most mature form. That's where sexual reproduction is going to take place. And this is the one that's going to exit the host. So jot these 3 stages down of the nematode life cycle: the egg, larval, and the adult phase, okay? Okay. So the basic life cycle is going to continue into these 7 stages, right? So we have the egg stage. We know where this is going to kind of be like our temporary stage as this outer covering harbors this organism, right? During the larval stages, there's L1 through L4, right? In the L1 stage, the nematode is just kind of sitting and developing inside of that egg. During L2, it's undergoing sort of normal growth, if you will. During that third larval stage, this is the infective stage for most species of the organism. And then the fourth larval stage is the stage where it's inside of the host as larvae, right? And then it will continue to mature into an adult, right? The adult stages can create either a male or a female, right? During the immature adult stage, it's going to pass through kind of like this L5 larval stage, but it's going to eventually become fully mature as an adult after that L5 larval stage, all right? One of the organisms that I want you to be familiar with is a human parasite, is the Ascarious worm. All right, there are many different nematodes that are parasitic to human: Ascarious, filarius, hookworms, pinworms, whipworms. You've probably heard about them all before. And that document that I provided is a great resource for you to go and sort of recap these. But I definitely want you to be familiar with the Ascarious worm. Okay, so jot that down for me. All right, so let's look at the Ascarious roundworm. All right, so the CDC reports that this is the most common human worm infection. Okay, this infection occurs in various areas of the world where, again, we're seeing things like sanitation, poor hygiene. These are going to lead to increased numbers of these types of infections. All right, it causes an intestinal disease, as I mentioned before, and it's called ascariasis. Jot that down for me. All right. Adult worms are going to reside in the human intestines. All right, that's where we can find these adult roundworms present in the human intestines. All right, so this Ascarious roundworm, again, is very common. Transmission is going to be through the etiological agent that causes ascariasis is Ascarious lumbricoides. Write that down. This is the organism. This is the genus and species that I want you to be familiar with as one of the most common human pathogen roundworms. Okay, so the causative agent for ascariasis is Ascarious lumbricoides, right? Worms and eggs are found in the human intestine. These eggs are obviously going to be passed out during defecation of someone that's infected. It's some way going to make its way back into the soil. Humans are going to become infected by ingesting these infected eggs. So again, we're talking about this fecal oral route of transmission, right? All right. So Ascarious lumbricoides, I do want you to be familiar with that. All right, we're going to stop right here today. I do have a homework assignment for you to go further explore the Ascarious infection cycle. All right, I want you to identify the host, right? I want you to identify the route of transmission, and I want you to discuss some of the symptoms of infections. All right, I want you to also spend a little bit of time identifying other human worm infections, right? So the filarial worm, pinworms, and hookworms. What are some infections in the human that are caused by these other types of roundworms? All right, so this is a very straightforward extension assignment tonight, and I'm gonna let it be due by midnight so you guys can have a little bit of time to go and investigate. All right, don't forget to provide your references and let me know if you have any questions. So you're looking at the Ascarious infection and then some others that are also caused by roundworms. What questions do you all have for me?
I'm okay.
All right, let me see.